In this next session, we'll have Markus Steffen, the president of the University of the Nations and the campus director at YWAM Lausanne. He's going to share with us the unique and powerful way that Jesus actually taught his disciples and how he communicated his message and what his lessons look like in such a way that it left his disciples changed forever.
This conversation is about Jesus and the classroom that he set up in his educational way to see people changed, transformed, and getting ready to go and disciple all nations. What kind of a classroom did Jesus create? In our DTS that I did many years ago, actually it's 39 years ago, that truly changed my life and set me on a path together with my wife. We were just married for 2 weeks and we came to this DTS, which was an amazing educational experience that allow us to know God and to grow in making him known. And I wondered at that time, how did they figure out this innovation called a YWAM Discipleship Training School? And I learned that they took that from the Jesus classroom. How do you mean Jesus classroom? I mean, when the Son of God came on earth, he revealed to us an educational format or a Christian formation format or a discipleship format or a human growth approach or a equipping approach, or we could call it, he introduced a Bachelor of Arts in Missions Leadership, or perhaps we could call it a Bachelor of Arts in impacting all nations. He came on earth to reveal the Father to us, and he came to bring our wonderful understanding of who God is and how to relate to him. He created this pathway and modeled for us not only the reconciliation with the Father and the truth that sets us free, he also modeled education in a beautiful way. As he came, he called 12 amazing leaders, very rough people from different parts and walks of life. He called them to a program and he said, "Come and follow me." And they responded and they left everything and they followed him, because that following was not a morning lecture every week. That was a living and learning, ministering and walking with Jesus. That was his classroom. And he called them and included them in everything that he was doing. He lived with them 24/7. They ministered together. They listened to his teaching. They also experienced the way Jesus related to the great variety of people. And they observed, they had a lot of questions. And Jesus included them in a process of learning that was based on that apprenticeship style of learning that Jesus experienced himself. Let's remind, where did Jesus come from? He grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Perhaps it was a carpenter's business that his family ran, or a handyman, whatever it might be in this category. Jesus, as a little boy, he saw his dad relating to customers. He saw his dad working in the shop, going and fixing roofs or creating beautiful furniture. He saw how customers came back who were not satisfied, and how his father and his brothers and his co-workers, how they actually related to customers that were not satisfied. How did they do after-sales services? How did they innovate new things and procedures? And so he grew up in this learning while doing, being immersed into a context of change and transformation. And he took that Jewish model of education and he applied that also to the equipping of the disciples to go and to teach all nations, to multiply the life and ministry of Jesus to the ends of the earth. And that model fascinates me. That model is so inspiring as we walk through a DTS and see how that all goes. And I love how Jesus created this classroom in that real life setting and how his lectures were embedded in experiential learning. So an example, he desired one of the lectures, one of the outcomes was to understand God's family. And so he was teaching one day and he was kind of talking to the crowds and there was a knock and someone came in and whispered, "Hey Jesus, your mother and your siblings are here, they want to see you." And he stood very calm, took another sip on his coffee, and he said, "Who is my family? Who are my brothers and sisters? Who is my mom?" And the audience thought, it's clear, isn't it? He has one mom, one dad, and he has all these brothers and sisters. What's the question? And they were thinking, and he responded to them and say, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of God, my Father in heaven, is my brother, my sister, my mom." Wow, that was shaking in the audience because that was so new, so something they didn't hear. And he taught through experiences where they were in a real setting, they listened, they responded, and there followed a long dialogue what that means and how that is worked out. And so Jesus, he had time for questions. He didn't just lecture, he asked many, many questions and waited on their response. He was not in a hurry. That education was not 45 minutes lectures and then a break. There was a very life-giving format embedded into meals, into walks, into time sitting somewhere at the river or at a lake. It was in action and it was embedded in a way that the experience actually made the lecture real in its emotions and in its thinking and in its pondering and in its engraving, imparting that truth deeply. So one day they went on a boat trip and Jesus was tired and he kind of lay down in the boat and he slept very deeply. And they thought, what a great joy to be on that boat trip, and Jesus, what an image. Imagine how that looked like, this calm water, and they are cruising along, the wind is blowing just a little bit, and Jesus sleeping there. What a peaceful place. And as they looked up, they saw the dark clouds, and the storm came up within minutes. And these great men that were used on the water, they were used on the industry, they knew how to handle a boat. And it was such a thorough, deep, great storm that they got really afraid. And they thought, we will die. And Jesus slept. What were they thinking? They thought, he can sleep in a storm. What peace comes forth from him? What kind of fragrance comes forth in a storm where the boat goes up and down and water spills across and he is just sleeping so calm. And the disciples, they looked at each other with these fearful eyes. They thought, what will happen? We will die. And they screamed at Jesus and said, "Wake up, man, we are dying, help!" And Jesus got up and kind of put his hair right. And he said, "What's wrong? Why are you so scared? Do you not know me? Do you not know the kingdom of God coming? Are you not aware that I'm with you?" And he stood up and he spoke to that storm and it became very calm. And he talked to them about faith and trust and that deep inner anchor to be aware that Jesus is with them, and therefore they are safe in his presence, and they are not moved by the circumstances, but they impact the circumstances, and they learn to arise within the midst of difficult circumstances, to be victorious, to be at peace, and to walk. This was a great lecture. For days and weeks they talked about it, and they understood areas in their life that they needed to grow, not because someone told them, but because they felt that deep need of overcoming that anxiety and that fear of death. What a lecture. Something that is so impacting, something that marks a life, that is like piercing an ear, that you will know that you know that you know, and in the next circumstances you are changed and you have grown into becoming more like Jesus. I love how Jesus taught. Or one day they had a big event. Jesus loved events, and he included them in setting them up. And so there were about 5,000 people. I mean, men and children and women, so a big crowd. And he taught them for long hours and many days. And the disciples, they came with their deep love for people and their sense of hospitality and management and organizing. They said, we really need to stop here and send the people home because they will faint, they are hungry, and there is no food. And Jesus smiled at them, and he figured out since a few days how this next lecture could look like. And he thought, I set the stage for a lecture that is called Feeding 5,000. And he said, you feed them. What a project to work on. And they were talking, they were calculating, they were trying to figure out what is needed to feed 5,000 men and women and children. How do we organize that? And they very quickly, without long project planning, they figured out impossible. Absolutely impossible. So they came back to Jesus and say, your project is really not working. Feeding them, it's absolutely impossible. And so they dialogued. Jesus said, why is it impossible? So they explained him all the reasons, the facts and figures. They were really good in explaining that, and he kept listening. He kept throwing out from them all the reasons why it's impossible. And he kept smiling at them, and he kept transmitting to them the love for people, his compassion for those children that were thirsty, that were hungry, and for these people that had a long way to walk home. He kind of imparted them that shepherd's heart that will do everything possible to care for people. And then he asked that question to say, what is around on food? What do you have? They had said, we have a little bit of bread and we have some fish. And he started to model to them how God cares for our daily needs. And he modeled a lecture that was not sitting in a classroom, that was an experiential, truth-revealing, faith-building, and deeply impacting lecture. And he said, please sit them down, organize them in groups. And then he took those few fish and this bread, and he said thanks to the Father, fixed his eyes, and he just was so filled with faith and care and love for the people that he said, now go and feed them. And as he broke the bread to these 12 and passed on the fish, it started to multiply. It started to grow, and each one had a little piece, and none of them rejected the task. They had a little fish and a little bread in their hand, and they went to this first group of about 50 people, and they started to hand it out, and it grew in their hands. Wow, it grew in their hands that all the 5,000 plus the women and the children were all fed, and they had baskets full of leftovers, and they collected that. Wow, the disciples, they were changed in knowing who God is and knowing the motivation of Jesus and the opportunities. And they were a part of it. This was not just a story read or a story looked at or a story watched. They were a part of the whole story. And that's the beauty of the education of Jesus that is so well described and that is so well documented in the Gospels, in this wonderful book that tells us the story from the beginning to the end, and that shows us the works of Jesus, and that shows us the story of his people, the strengths, their failures, their victories, and their learning lessons. And it reveals to us who God is, that we can know him, and that we can become like him, and that we can grow and make him known throughout the earth. And this form of education to experience is something that we see in the DTS applied, that is multiplied, that we are drawn into a story. Every DTS, every course in YWAM's University of the Nations, you are a part of the story of that community in which it takes place, of that outreach that does the works of God and participates in a missional context, and of that amazing reality of God working among the nations and in a real community creating history. So in our educational model, we follow Jesus. We follow how his classroom looked like, and we are deeply, deeply impacted in our hearts. It's a change of heart. In this feeding of the 5,000, the hearts of the disciples changed from an organizational management question to a question of care, to a question of being a pastor, being a provider, being someone that really loves and cares for people. And it changed to a heart that looked for their own food, to a heart that is filled with faith, to see God at work, to see the needs of people in this world truly changed. And so this degree track unfolded to more and more challenging lessons. One of them was in the Gospel of John, described when they had a wonderful meal together. They had a wonderful meal sitting around, fellowshipping, telling their stories. Jesus asked them questions. They had a lot of laughter and a lot of joy. And at some point, Jesus took off his shirt, and everyone said, "Who? What is happening?" And he took off his shirt and put down a cloth, and he knelt down and he started to wash the disciples' feet. And some of them resisted, say, hey, not me. That is not possible. You cannot do that to me. And Jesus looked at them with great compassion and said, unless I can wash your feet, unless you allow me to minister to your basic needs, unless you include me in your life, unless you open your heart to receive that humble ministry, it will be very hard for you to see the kingdom of God. And so he, in great silence, washed the feet of the disciples. And you can imagine what went through the minds and heads, hearts and emotions of these wonderful friends. They were thinking, they were pondering, why is he doing that? And he looked at them. They saw the love of God radiating to them. Say, you know what I did to you? That's your life. That's your mandate. Go and disciple all nations through serving them, through washing their feet. Look, where are the basic needs of people? Serve them. Don't just have great vision. Be active, very practically, and help people to experience, not just to hear, but to see with their eyes, to experience in their own life the love of God. As I have served you, go and serve. And so I trust that this experiential, this apprentice type of classroom, that this is something that will make you hungry to learn in a fresh and in a new way, to get ready to be commissioned, to get ready to be commended. Like Jesus, he gave them the degree of commendation. He commended them at the end and said, you go and you disciple all nations. You go to the ends of the earth and you preach that gospel and to teach them everything I have taught you. You baptize them and you serve them in the same way I did. And you know what? This educational program that Jesus did, this commending and this commissioning of the disciples has truly worked, because the gospel came to you and me, that today in 2020 we are followers of Jesus because of this amazing, integrated, mind, heart and hand program that changed people in the core and equipped them in their skills and capacities, that they were able to be true fisher of men. And he sent them out and they went and they passed that on to others, that it came to us, and we are now a part of this story, you and me, that we can go and we can know him and make him known. What a classroom. Let's multiply that classroom wherever we go. I love Jesus and his wonderful way of changing my life and of including all of us in experiencing the truth that truly marks us and imparts his spirit and his capacities in us. I love Jesus.